Jack Miller had nothing left. No home, no family, just a worn leather jacket and a loyal German shepherd named Rocco. Desperate, he spent his last dollars on a dusty storage unit filled with nothing but moldy trash. But when Rocco began clawing at a strange plywood wall, everything changed. Behind it lay a hidden compartment, a sealed folder, and a steel military box tied to a murder covered up for nearly 30 years. Within minutes, 2 unknown men arrived searching for the same secret, and Jack realized he wasn't supposed to find any of it. If this story touches you, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Your click really means more than you think. God bless you for keeping hope alive. A brutal Cleveland winter pressed against the city like a giant hand of ice, swallowing sound and softening the shapes of abandoned warehouses beneath a sky the color of wet steel. Jack Miller pushed through the wind with the weary precision of a man who had walked in storms far worse. At 45, he stood 182 meters tall, his frame still strong, but thinned out by years spent living on the fringes of the world. His weathered brown leather jacket, its corners cracked from time and cold, hung over a red and navy flannel shirt that had once belonged to a friend he never mentioned. His jeans were faded, nearly white in places, boots scuffed and scarred, and a gray wool scarf loosely wrapped around his neck fluttered with each heavy breath. His face, all sharp lines and lingering shadows, carried the stubble of someone who rarely had the luxury to shave. But it was the eyes that told the truth, gray deep and burdened with a silence shaped long ago on foreign soil. Beside him moved Rocco, his 6-year-old German shepherd, a large male with a thick sable coat and intelligent amber eyes. The dog walked close, almost touching Jack's leg, as if the two were tied together by grief. Rocco had the muscular build of a working dog, but carried himself with a strange stillness, a mirror to Jack's internal storms. He didn't bark without reason. He didn't startle easily. And he didn't hesitate when Jack's world began to crack open again. Jack had exactly $34 left when he decided to take a chance on a storage unit auction. He told himself it was just to buy something he could resell: an old chair, a power tool, whatever would get Rocco through another week. But the truth was simpler and sadder. Men who carry ghosts often cling to any spark that keeps them warm. The Pine Gate storage facility was nearly empty when he arrived, his breath fogging in the air as he watched the auctioneer wave bored buyers through an aisle of identical metal doors. Unit 31B sold for $200, Unit 16A for $450. Jack didn't even bother stepping forward. He felt like an intruder in a world that had moved on without him. Then the auctioneer cut the lock on the final unit, a dusty door with peeling blue paint, and groaned as it rolled open. A waft of mold hit first sharp enough to sting. Inside was a graveyard of soggy cardboard, rusted metal parts, piles of old magazines melted together by time and moisture, and a smell so stale it made Jack blink. $10, the auctioneer called out with a laugh. No one answered. Jack swallowed, then lifted a shaky hand. 34. All I have. Sold, the man said almost instantly, eager to be done. It felt like failure as Jack stepped inside the freezing little room with Rocco at his heels. The concrete floor bit through the soles of his boots. The dampness in the air tasted like defeat. He rummaged through a box only to watch it collapse into mush. A lamp crumbled in his hands. A stack of books disintegrated like ash. Nothing, he muttered. That was when Rocco froze. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body lowering into a tense line. His tail stiffened, and a deep rumble vibrated in his chest. He moved slowly toward the back wall, a sheet of cheap plywood stained with dark watermarks, and placed his nose against it. A soft whine escaped him, one Jack had heard only a handful of times, always right before something important. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, fatigue giving way to a strange alertness. Rocco scratched lightly at the base of the plywood. Jack frowned. "Rats? No. No, you don't act like this for rats." He stepped closer and pressed his palm to the wood. Something about the stain lines bothered him. They were too straight, too deliberate. He knocked once. The sound was hollow. A cold whisper slid down his spine. He grabbed a broken metal rod from the floor and wedged it under the edge of the plywood. With a grunt, he yanked. The board cracked, then tore away with a sharp, dry snap, falling to the floor and sending a cloud of dust into the air. Behind it was a hidden compartment no wider than an arm's length. Jack's flashlight beam wobbled slightly with his breath as he aimed it inside. 3 objects sat neatly on the concrete like offerings left in a tomb. A small wooden box, its surface dark with age. A sealed document folder stamped shut with thick red wax, and a black military-grade steel case secured by 3 combination locks. The air in the compartment smelled of old metal and forgotten years. Jack reached first for the folder. The wax cracked under his thumb. He unfolded the top page, a letter written in trembling strokes of blue ink. "If you are reading this, I, Robert Hale, may already be dead." Jack's pulse thudded so loudly he almost didn't hear Rocco's growl deepen behind him. Something in the dog's tone shifted from curiosity to warning. Rocco's body moved slightly forward, placing himself between Jack and the doorway. Then Jack heard it too, the crunch of boots on frozen ground outside. Slow, heavy, purposeful. A voice low and confident cut through the cold. "He's still in there. Don't let him leave." Another voice answered, rougher. "Close the door." Jack's fingers tightened around the letter. Rocco stepped forward, hackles rising, and the shadow of a man darkened the doorway. The chapter ends there. Jack standing in the glow of his flashlight, one hand clutching the confession of a dead man, while Rocco braces to defend him from figures he was never meant to meet. Snow drifted through the deserted industrial blocks, like pale ashes from a dying fire settling over cracked pavement and forgotten loading docks in the outskirts of Cleveland. Jack Miller ran with the controlled urgency of a man who had outrun danger before his boots hammering against the frozen ground, while Rocco kept pace at his left side, the dog's breath steaming in harsh white bursts. Behind them, the distant slam of the storage unit door echoed like a warning shot. The 2 men who had approached silhouettes of trouble were now searching. Jack didn't know their names, but he knew the type men who moved with confidence, because they believed nothing in the world could touch them. Jack's mind was a churn of instinct and memory. The cold didn't bother him. It was the feeling of being hunted that scraped against the old scars in his chest. His past, those days overseas, filled with commanders who twisted truth into weapons, rose up like smoke. He tightened his grip on his backpack, inside which lay the wooden box, the sealed folder, and the letter that had blown a hole straight through 20 years of silence. He ducked into an alley between 2 abandoned factories, Rocco pressing close, the dog's body taut with attention. The alley stank of rust and stale oil. Jack paused, forced himself to breathe quietly, and listened. Only wind, only the whisper of snow. After a few long seconds, he moved again, weaving through debris and broken machinery, until he spotted a structure ahead, an old train depot, its roof half-caved, its red brick walls marred by time. It looked dead perfect for hiding. Inside the depot, the air was heavy with dust and metal. Jack kept to the shadows, stepping around old pallets and dead light fixtures until he found a corner shielded from the broken windows. He knelt down against a cold steel pillar. Rocco sat beside him, not panting, just watching him with that steady anchoring stare that had kept Jack from falling apart more than once. Jack finally pulled the red-sealed folder from his pack. His hands, still trembling with the adrenaline of the chase, cracked the wax completely. The first page was the letter he'd glimpsed in the unit, now far more ominous in the silence of this abandoned place. "My name is Robert Hale. If you are reading this, I may already be dead." Jack exhaled slowly. He felt the weight of those words settle in his gut. Robert's handwriting slanted unevenly, as though written during moments of fear or exhaustion. The letter unfolded into a confession of a life spent running and regretting. Robert had been an environmental engineer in the 1990s, a man who believed in data, in truth, in the simple morality of protecting people. His younger brother, Mark Hale, had been brighter, louder, a charismatic activist with hope big enough to scare powerful men. Mark had died at 29 in what newspapers called a laboratory accident inside a testing facility tied to Harrington Development, the largest real estate corporation in Ohio. But Robert's letter made it clear the accident was staged. Mark had uncovered falsified environmental reports tied to the construction of a massive housing project. He had evidence Harrington Development deliberately hid toxic contamination beneath the site to save millions. Mark had told his brother he planned to expose them. 3 days later, the explosion happened. Jack's heart tightened as he read. The words felt too familiar. Too close. He remembered Deacon Armstrong, his teammate overseas who had died because a superior officer falsified maintenance reports on their vehicle. Deacon's death, like Mark's, had been labeled operator error. Jack had tried to fight the lie. Command shut him down. The system protected itself. Jack had carried the shame of failure ever since. Robert Hale had lived with similar guilt, but unlike Jack, he had run. Terrified after Mark's death, after men in suits began showing up at his home and asking what Mark had shared with him, Robert fled the state and spent 2 decades hiding. His letter trembled with remorse. "I could not save my brother, but I could save what he died for. I hid the documents. I hid everything. If someone is brave enough to find them, find Emily Ross." She loved him. She never stopped fighting. Jack lowered the letter, staring at the dusty floor. Emily Ross. The name carried a quiet weight. Robert's letter described her as Mark's partner, at the time a 25-year-old graduate student studying environmental policy, sharp-minded and relentless. If she was still alive, she would be in her mid-40s now. The type of woman who had probably learned to live with suspicion threats and a heartbreak no one ever validated. Jack reached for the wooden box and opened it. Inside were photographs, worn and curled at the edges. One showed Mark Hale, dark hair, athletic build, friendly smile, holding a laughing woman in his arms. Emily Ross. She appeared petite but strong, with expressive brown eyes and a determined tilt of her chin. Another photo showed Mark standing in front of a community center project, his hand raised, as he spoke to a small crowd. His expression burned with conviction. Jack felt a familiar ache in his chest. The kind of ache that came from seeing someone who once believed they could change the world. He wasn't sure what frightened him more, the men hunting him for what he now carried, or the realization that he was being pulled into a fight he had once failed to win. Rocco nudged his arm gently. The dog's amber eyes were steady, as if urging him not to retreat back into the shadows of old mistakes. Jack forced a slow exhale. "Yeah, boy," he murmured. "I know." With each line, he reread in Robert's letter, the edges of Jack's fear hardened into something sharper. Not recklessness, not hope, but resolve, the quiet, stubborn resolve of a man who had lost too much to let injustice win again. There was only one path now. He had to find Emily Ross before the men who killed Mark Hale found him. Jack folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the backpack. He stood slinging the bag over his shoulder. Rocco rose instantly, tail stiff, ears alert. Outside, wind curled through the depot's broken doorway. Night was falling fast, and with it came the certainty that the danger stalking them wasn't finished. Jack touched Rocco's head. "Come on. We're not running forever. Not this time." The dog pressed against his leg, ready. The chapter ends with Jack stepping out of the depot's shadows, the letter of a dead man heavy against his spine, and the snow swallowing the sound of distant footsteps behind them. Evening snow drifted over Columbus like a slow-falling veil, dimming the glow of traffic lights and softening the edges of aging apartment blocks. Jack Miller moved through the residential streets with Rocco padding close beside him, the German shepherd's paws, leaving neat tracks along the slushy sidewalk. Jack's breath fogged in the cold, mixing with the cloud of dread coiled in his chest. Every step toward Emily Ross felt like stepping deeper into someone else's grief. Yet he knew this was where Robert Hale's letter had pointed him, where truth had been waiting for decades. Emily lived in a modest brick apartment complex on the northern side of the city, a place tucked between a pharmacy and a quiet coffee shop that smelled faintly of cinnamon. As Jack climbed the stairs, he felt the weight of years pressing on him, years filled with things he should have done, things he didn't do, and things he tried desperately to forget. He had spent so long running from the ghosts of men he couldn't save. Now he was walking straight toward the woman who had spent 20 years carrying her own ghost. Emily Ross opened the door after 2 knocks. She was 44 now, of average height, her figure lean in the way of someone who worked long hours and often forgot to eat dinner. Her dark brown hair, streaked with early silver, was tied back loosely, and her warm-toned skin looked pale under the dim hallway light. She wore a thick forest green sweater and dark slacks, simple, practical clothing. But what struck Jack most were her eyes. They were expressive and deep-set, the kind of eyes that once held fierce conviction, but had been dimmed over time by unanswered questions. Behind them lingered the tired vigilance of a woman who'd had too many reasons not to trust the world. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious, but not unfriendly. Jack cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how he must look tall, unshaven, wrapped in a worn leather jacket and scarf accompanied by a dog built like a storm. "My name is Jack Miller," he said quietly. "I found something. Something that belonged to Mark Hale." Emily froze. Her hand tightened reflexively on the doorknob, and for a moment Jack feared she might shut the door on him. Instead, she stepped aside. "Come in." Her living room was neat, but filled with stacks of documents, environmental reports, maps, and newspaper clippings, evidence of a life dedicated to uncovering something the world had buried. Jack sat on the edge of a modest beige couch, while Rocco settled by his feet like a silent guardian. Emily stood near the window, arms crossed, watching him with the caution of someone who had been disappointed too many times. Jack unzipped his backpack and gently placed the wooden box and the red-sealed folder on her coffee table. Emily's breath hitched. She moved toward them slowly, as if approaching a relic she feared would crumble beneath her fingers. When she lifted the lid of the wooden box and saw the photographs inside, Mark smiling. Mark holding her in an embrace, frozen in time, her knees buckled. She sank onto the couch beside Jack, both hands covering her mouth as her shoulders trembled. Rocco nudged her knee softly, sensing anguish that transcended words. Jack looked away, giving her space, but the sound of her grief cut through him. It reminded him of wives and sisters he'd met overseas, clutching letters or dog tags after the military closed their cases without giving them the truth. It reminded him of all the things he could never undo. After nearly a minute, Emily wiped her eyes and reached for the sealed letter. When she read Robert's confession, something shifted inside her. The sorrow was still there, but beneath it, something long dormant flickered awake, a quiet fury, a purpose that had waited 2 decades. So he knew, she whispered. He knew they killed Mark. And he ran. Her voice was not angry, just exhausted. Jack exhaled. Fear does that? I've seen it. Emily looked at him, then searching his face, reading the lines carved by guilt. Maybe she saw something familiar there, another person hollowed out by a truth they couldn't save. But the moment of fragile connection shattered when Rocco suddenly lifted his head, ears snapping erect. A low growl rolled from his chest. Jack stood instantly. Someone's outside. Emily's expression shifted from fear to dread. They've been watching me for years, she whispered. Every time I got close to something, documents, retired employees, old reports, someone would show up. Usually men in black SUVs. They never spoke. They just reminded me to stop asking questions. Jack moved to the window just in time to see 2 figures approaching the building's entryway. Both wore heavy black jackets and dark jeans. The first was Cole Maddox, a man of 38 with a broad chest, a shaved head, and a rugged jaw. His face was the kind forged in violence, small scars along his chin, a broken nose that hadn't healed, right eyes hard, with the indiscriminate confidence of someone used to intimidation. The second was Ray Johnson, slightly older at 40 tall, and wiry, with a narrow face, a patchy beard, and twitchy movements that suggested a temperament sharpened by paranoia or past addiction. Both carried the cold posture of men paid to make problems disappear. They're here for the documents, Jack muttered. We need to move. Now. Emily grabbed her coat, her hands shaking but her movements decisive. Rocco stayed glued to Jack's side as they slipped out the apartment's back stairwell. The wind outside cut across their faces like blades as snow thickened around them. They hurried down an alley, their footsteps muffled by slush, while behind them the sound of a door being kicked open echoed through the street. Maddox and Ray had found the apartment empty. Jack quickened his pace, leading Emily across a side street and into an industrial zone where towering warehouses cast jagged shadows. The area was nearly abandoned at night, save for the flicker of streetlights struggling through the snowfall. Rocco darted ahead, then doubled back, ensuring the path was clear. Where are we going? Emily asked, breathless. Away from anyone who wants to silence us, Jack said. We'll hide for now, then we figure out our next move. Once they reached the cover of a loading dock, Emily opened the red-sealed folder with trembling fingers. Using the weak glow of a flickering overhead light, she thumbed through the documents. Her face tightened with each page. Jack, she whispered. This is everything. Look, records of illegal waste burial under the East Bend housing project, schematics of unreported construction changes, lists of payouts to officials. She swallowed hard, then pulled out a final item. And this. A compact cassette tape with Mark Hale's handwriting Harrington threat. Final warning. Emily's breath broke. They killed him for this. Jack stared at the tape. His own past flashed inside him like a wound reopening. Then this isn't history, he said quietly. It's a fight we've stepped right into. Rocco pressed against his leg, as if agreeing. And somewhere in the distance, footsteps cracked through snow again, reminding them that danger had not yet passed. A cold gray dawn spread over the outskirts of Dayton, its weak light filtering through low clouds like a tired apology. The air smelled of rust and old rain clinging to the wide fields of shuttered warehouses that stretched across the industrial district. Jack Miller moved through the desolate landscape with Rocco at his heel, the dog's breath forming white clouds in the brittle morning air. Emily Ross followed close, bundled in her winter coat, her face drawn but resolute. They had traveled most of the night, stumbling through back roads and silent towns, only stopping when Jack felt sure they had shaken Maddox and Ray off their trail. But he knew the peace wouldn't last. Men like Cole Maddox and Ray Johnson didn't give up. They were hounds paid to hunt until the job was done. And this time Jack wasn't just running for himself. He was shielding a woman who'd carried the weight of truth alone for 20 years. And he was carrying evidence powerful enough to topple giants. Their destination loomed ahead, a dented metal door set into a long warehouse with faded lettering that once read, Harper Supply Storage. Standing outside was a man Jack hadn't seen in nearly a decade. David Kane. At 52, David had the build of someone who had once been athletic, but now carried the heaviness of too many lost battles. His short salt and pepper hair framed a square, stern face, marked by the creases of long stress. He wore a dark jacket over a gray button-up shirt, and his posture, rigid yet tired, told Jack everything David hadn't truly rested in years. He had once been a respected FBI agent, meticulous, unshakable, but his investigation into Harrington Development had cost him his career. Internal pressure, political phone calls, files disappearing, evidence mishandled. He'd been forced out, but not broken. Jack David said, with a voice roughened by sleepless nights. I saw the burner message. Didn't expect to hear from you again, especially not with this kind of trouble. Jack stepped forward. We need help, and you're the only person I trust who knows what we're up against. David's eyes slid to Emily. She greeted him with a small nod, her expression cautious but hopeful. He studied her for a moment, recognizing her name from the old case files, then nodded back. Let's get inside, David said, before trouble catches up. The warehouse interior was a wide, dimly lit space, smelling of dust and cold metal. Old racks and empty crates lined the walls, giving it the appearance of a forgotten shelter. David led them to a makeshift table in the center, where a portable lamp cast a warm glow. Show me what you have, David said. Jack placed the steel military case on the table. The box looked heavier in this light, its 3 combination locks glinting like the eyes of something ancient and dangerous. Emily set down the wooden box and the red sealed folder, her hand shaking only slightly now. David pulled on gloves and examined the locks. I recognize the model, used in federal evidence storage back in the 90s. His voice took on a tone of old expertise. Give me a few minutes. While he worked, Jack paced the warehouse, his boots whispering across concrete. Every creak of the metal roof made his shoulders tense. He felt the weight of his failure with Deacon Armstrong pressing against him again. He had vowed never to let another innocent die because he hesitated or walked away. Now here he was with a woman who trusted him and a dog who depended on him, both staring at him with expectation he feared he didn't deserve. Rocco sensed the turmoil and brushed his head against Jack's leg. Jack paused, crouched and stroked the dog's neck. I'm not running, he whispered. Not this time. A metallic click echoed through the warehouse. David straightened. Got it. He lifted the lid of the steel case. Inside lay documents arranged with almost obsessive precision folders, stamped with official seals, rolled blueprints, and binders packed with densely printed reports. David exhaled sharply. Good God. This is everything they buried? Emily leaned over the table, her eyes wide. Let me see. They scanned the documents together. Each page cut deeper into the truth. A ledger listing cash payouts to city officials, county inspectors, and state-level regulators. Forged environmental permits stamped with falsified signatures. Maps showing where toxic waste had been illegally buried beneath the East Bend housing project. The original land survey proving Mark Hale had been the legal owner of a contested parcel that Harrington Development seized using fraudulent paperwork. And at the bottom of the box, in a sealed plastic bag, lay the cassette tape labeled in Mark's handwriting. Harrington Threat, original recording. Emily's hand covered her mouth. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but they were not soft tears. They were hard-edged burning. They murdered him because he wouldn't stay silent. David nodded grimly. This tape alone could bring down Harrington's entire executive board. But the paper trail that will bury them deeper than any waste site. For the first time since meeting her, Jack saw something powerful ignite behind Emily's grief. A purpose. A fire Mark had once carried. Before anyone could speak again, Rocco stiffened. The dog's ears shot forward, hackles rising. A low rumble built in his chest. Jack froze. "Someone's here." David killed the lamp instantly, plunging the warehouse into dimness, broken only by the weak morning light leaking through cracks in the walls. Jack moved toward a window, keeping low. Then he saw them. Black SUVs parked outside, shadows moving, voices carried by the wind. Cole Maddox and Ray Johnson had arrived with reinforcements. Emily's breath hitched. David's jaw clenched. Jack felt his pulse slam through his veins. "We can't fight them," David whispered. "Not head on. We don't have to." Jack pointed toward the back of the warehouse. "There's a maintenance tunnel. If it's still intact," Rocco growled louder. The enemy was getting closer. David grabbed the documents. Emily scooped up the tape. Jack slung the steel case over his shoulder. "Move," Jack ordered. They sprinted across the warehouse as heavy boots thundered against the front door. Maddox's voice bellowed from outside, filled with cruel certainty. "Don't let them get away this time." Jack shoved open a rusted metal hatch. A cold, narrow tunnel yawned beneath them, dark, filthy, and barely passable. Emily climbed down first, clutching the evidence. David followed. Jack dropped next, Rocco leaping after him with uncanny agility. Above them, the warehouse door crashed open. Then Jack slammed the hatch shut, sealing them inside the earth as the hunt roared overhead. Warm sunlight spread gently across Washington, D.C., a soft summer haze casting golden reflections on the glass towers rising above the Capitol. It was a calm day, too calm for the storm of truth that was about to shake an empire. Jack Miller stood outside the federal courthouse, one hand resting on the thick fur of Rocco, the 6-year-old German shepherd, whose loyalty had carved a path through countless dangers. Jack's tall frame, wrapped in his worn brown leather jacket, despite the warm season, drew stares from passers-by, but his mind was far from the bustling city around him. He felt the familiar tension in his chest, the memory of every moment he failed to protect those he cared about. The ghosts of his past never drifted far. But today the ghosts were quieter. Emily Ross approached from the courthouse steps, her dark hair tied back neatly, her face illuminated with a mixture of fear and hope. At 44, Emily carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had survived long winters alone, holding on to truths that no one believed. Her eyes met Jack's. They no longer held the hollow ache of grief, but the steady burn of justice long denied. "They're ready for us," Emily said softly, trying to steady her breath. Behind her, walking with a careful stride, was David Kane. The former FBI agent looked more alive than Jack had ever seen him, still worn, still heavy with years of burden, but carrying a renewed sense of purpose. He wore a dark blazer this time, simple and dignified, his salt and pepper hair trimmed clean. "We go in hand everything to the prosecutors, and we stay together," David reminded them. "Harrington's people won't be able to touch us once the story breaks." Jack nodded, but anxiety flickered in his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear for what would happen if one piece of the plan went wrong. Emily noticed the tension in his jaw. "It's going to work," she whispered. "Mark didn't die for nothing, and Robert didn't hide everything for it to stay buried." Jack lowered his gaze. "I just don't want to fail you. Any of you." Rocco bumped his head gently into Jack's knee, a silent reassurance. Jack exhaled. The dog always seemed to know when the past clawed its way back into his mind. Inside the courthouse, the air was cool and sterile. A team from American Chronicle, one of the most respected investigative media outlets in the country, waited alongside Federal Attorney Grace Holloway, a woman nearing 50 with sharp brown eyes and a calm, deliberate voice. Grace had short black hair streaked with silver, a purposeful posture, and the unmistakable presence of someone who had fought too many uphill battles and refused to ever back down. "You must be Jack Miller," she said, stepping forward and shaking his hand firmly. "And the dog Rocco Wright, you two have caused quite a hurricane." Jack wasn't used to being acknowledged. He gave a modest nod. "Just did what I had to." Grace smiled. "Most people don't risk their lives for strangers. That's what makes the difference." The media team set up cameras and recorders, while Grace began laying out the evidence across a long conference table. The steel box, the ledgers, the forged permits, the land deed, and finally the cassette tape containing the CEO's voice. When the tape played, the room fell silent. The voice of Nathan Harrington, smooth but laced with venom, echoed across the speakers. "Mark Hale needs to disappear. I don't care how. If he talks, the whole operation collapses. Handle it." Emily closed her eyes as the words washed over her. A tremor ran through her body, but she stayed standing. Jack stepped closer just in case she needed support. The journalists exchanged horrified glances. Grace Holloway pressed stop on the player and let out a slow exhale. That, she said, her voice low and controlled, is the final nail in the coffin. Within 48 hours, the storm exploded. Harrington Development fell like a collapsing tower arrests subpoenas frozen accounts. Nathan Harrington was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, environmental fraud, and bribery. 4 city officials linked to the waste dumping scandal were taken from their homes in handcuffs. The East Bend project, built on toxic ground, was shut down immediately for emergency investigation. And the cold case of Mark Hale, after 27 years, was officially reopened. For Emily, the news hit like a blessing and a wound at once. She watched the announcement broadcast on national television, tears slipping down her cheeks, tears not of sorrow, but of long-delayed relief. Her voice shook as she spoke to the reporters. Mark didn't die in vain. His truth is alive again. In the following weeks, Emily received full legal ownership of the land Mark had once fought to protect. She stood on the edge of the property with the summer sun pouring across her face, imagining what the land could become, not a grave of corruption, but a place where people found strength. The Hale Community Center was her dream, a training hub for workers, a shelter for families in crisis, a support network for veterans returning from war, a place where no one would be abandoned the way Jack had been. She turned to Jack, who stood beside her with Rocco at attention. His jacket flapped slightly in the warm breeze, and for the first time in years, he looked not like a man running from something, but a man finally belonging somewhere. "Jack," she said gently, "I want you to run the center with me. Head of security and operations. You know how to protect people. You saved my life. And you gave me back the truth." Jack swallowed hard. "Emily, I don't know if I deserve you do," she said, cutting him off. "This place needs someone who understands pain, someone who won't look away, someone like you." Rocco barked once, as if seconding the offer. Jack let out a breath that felt like releasing years of suffocating weight. "All right," he murmured. "If you'll have me. I'm in." Construction began soon after. By early summer, the land was filled with the clatter of hammers, the growl of engines, and the laughter of workers who believed they were building something greater than themselves. Jack oversaw the security gates, checked the plan's guided volunteers, and walked the grounds with Rocco at his side, a constant, faithful guardian. And one warm evening under the amber light of sunset, Jack paused beside the half-built community center. Rocco sat beside him, the dog's steady gaze fixed on the glowing horizon. Jack's gray eyes softened. The years of guilt, the ghosts, the crushing weight of failure, they weren't gone. But they no longer defined him. Rocco nudged his leg gently, and Jack placed a hand on the dog's head. "We made it, boy," he whispered. "We finally made it." And for the first time in a very long time, Jack Miller felt alive. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive as thunder or light, but as small, quiet moments, a loyal dog refusing to give up a stranger finding the courage to stand again, a truth finally rising after years in the dark. Jack's journey reminds us that even in our ordinary days, grace can break through the cracks. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and join us in spreading compassion. May God bless you, guide your steps, and keep you and your loved ones safe.